There are mornings that break with the promise of deliverance, and there are those that dawn like the slow unsealing of a tomb. The day Alianor of Hawksmere was wed belonged to the latter. I remember the bells, not as a witness of flesh, but as a keeper of echoes. They tolled through the moorland mist, each note sinking into the stone and bone of that cursed keep like the striking of a dirge. They did not celebrate a union, they consecrated a captivity. The chronicles will tell you she was richly dressed, green samite, jewels and lace. They will write that she was a bride of great fortune and greater alliance, that Sir Roland de Mowbray, newly Lord of Hawksmere, restored the old family's honor. But chronicles are cowards. They turn away from the blood that feeds the roses. The truth, as it so often does, lay in silence, in the trembling of her hands, in the tightness of her smile, in the sound of a vow forced through numb lips. I have seen many such marriages, bound not by affection, but by ownership. The church blesses them, society applauds them, and history calls them triumphs. Yet beneath every triumph lies a woman entombed alive. Alianor walked into that chapel as a daughter of Hawksmere and left it as its prisoner. Her gown was no bridal garment, but a winding sheet dyed in emerald. I sometimes wonder whether she knew, when the bells tolled that morning, that her soul had already been claimed long before the priest uttered, "Till death us do part." I think she did. I think that is why she did not weep. The tears of the condemned dry long before the executioner arrives. It is a terrible thing to be buried while still breathing, and yet it is from such graves that legends are born.
Chapter 10. The Ashes of Mourning. The wedding bells of Hawksmere Keep didn't chime, they tolled. Each heavy, resonant clang seemed to vibrate through the ancient stones, through the marrow of Alianor's bones, marking not a beginning, but an intermit. She stood beside Roland in the drafty chapel, the scent of damp stone and beeswax candles thick in the air, mingling nauseatingly with the cloying sweetness of the winter honeysuckle Sister Marjorie had insisted upon. The cold seeped through the thin soles of her slippers, a constant, grounding misery. She wore the green samite. It felt like a shroud. The color, deep as a poisoned forest pool, seemed to leach the warmth from her skin. The fabric, heavy and expensive, dragged at her shoulders, a constant reminder of the bargain struck with the devil beside her. Roland's hand, large and possessive, covered hers where it lay limp on his arm. His touch was like hot iron, branding her flesh. He radiated satisfaction, a conqueror surveying his prize, his voice booming the responses with pious fervor that echoed hollowly in the near-empty chapel. Father Clement's voice, by contrast, was thin, strained, his eyes avoiding hers, fixed instead on the crucifix above the altar, as if seeking strength. Lord Edmund mumbled incoherently in his chair, propped up like a forgotten effigy. Bess stood rigid among the handful of Mowbray servants, her face a mask of terrified pallor, her knuckles white where she clutched her skirts. Sister Marjorie, seated prominently, observed everything with the keen, unblinking eyes of a carrion crow, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. Alianor repeated the vows. Her voice was a monotone whisper, devoid of life, the words ash in her mouth. I, Alianor, take thee, Roland, to have and to hold. Each phrase was a shackle snapping closed. Till death us do part. The finality of it echoed Roland's threat in the cold chamber. The cage has only one master. The feast that followed in the great hall was a grotesque parody of celebration. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, glistening pies, and flagons of Roland's imported wine, bounty paid for by Hawksmere's veins of lead. The hall, usually echoing with emptiness, was filled with the raucous noise of Roland's men-at-arms, merchants currying favor, and minor gentry eager to align themselves with the ascendant de Mowbray star. Laughter boomed, too loud, too forced. Jokes were bawdy, the atmosphere thick with ale-fueled bonhomie that felt predatory to Alianor. She sat at the high table beside Roland, a silent, green-clad doll. He played the magnanimous lord, toasting his beloved bride, his hand frequently finding her knee beneath the table, a proprietary squeeze that made her stomach clench. She picked at the rich food, each morsel threatening to choke her. The Samite felt tighter, hotter, suffocating. She could feel Sister Marjorie's gaze, assessing, cataloging her every flinch, every moment her mask of numb compliance slipped. Across the hall, Bess scurried, refilling goblets with shaking hands, flinching whenever a soldier's laugh rang out too near. Roland leaned close, his breath warm and cloying with wine, and cloves against her ear. "Smile, wife," he murmured, the endearment a lash. "You are the radiant Lady de Mowbray. Show them your gratitude for my protection." His hand tightened painfully on her knee. The unspoken threat hung between them, as tangible as the roasted boar on the platter before them. Bess Alianor forced her lips to curve upwards. It felt like cracking ice. She lifted her goblet in a mockery of a toast, meeting the eyes of a leering merchant across the table. The wine tasted like vinegar. Later, much later, when the torches burned low and the hall echoed with drunken snores and the clatter of clearing servants, Roland steered her firmly towards the stairs. His grip on her arm was unyielding. The climb to the Lord's chamber, their chamber now, felt like a walk to the gallows. The heavy oak door closed behind them with a finality that stole her breath. The room was large, dominated by a vast canopied bed Roland had brought from de Mowbray Castle. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering, monstrous shadows on the tapestries that couldn't quite dispel the room's inherent chill. The lingering scent of disuse and dust beneath the overlay of beeswax and Roland's clove pomander. He released her arm and moved to pour himself wine from a decanter on a side table, his movements precise, controlled. He didn't look at her immediately, letting the silence stretch, thick with dread. He sipped his wine, then finally turned. His eyes, in the firelight, held no warmth, only a cold, assessing calculation. The silk bedrobe he wore gaped slightly at the neck, revealing the strong column of his throat. He looked every inch the lord in his domain. Alianor stood frozen near the door, still in the hateful green gown, feeling like an intruder, a piece of furniture delivered to the wrong room. "Take it off," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the false joviality of the feast. Alianor's hands trembled as she fumbled with the intricate laces at the back of the gown. Her fingers felt thick, clumsy. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rapid, frantic beating of her own heart. She could feel his gaze on her back, a physical weight. "Faster," he commanded, a note of impatience sharpening his tone. She finally managed the last lace, the heavy samite sliding from her shoulders to pool at her feet like discarded moss. She stood shivering in her thin linen chemise, the cold air raising gooseflesh on her arms. She kept her eyes fixed on the worn patterns of the rug beneath her bare feet. Roland set his goblet down with a soft click. He crossed the room in 2 strides. She flinched as his hands closed on her shoulders, turning her roughly to face him. His touch was impersonal, clinical. His eyes raked over her exposed throat, the thin fabric of the chemise, lingering. There was no desire in his gaze, only possession, and a chilling anticipation of conquest. "You understand your duty, wife?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. It wasn't a question. She couldn't speak. Her throat was closed tight. She managed a tiny, jerky nod, her eyes squeezed shut. His laugh was short, humorless. "Good." One hand tangled roughly in her hair, tilting her head back, forcing her to look at him. His other hand grasped the neckline of her chemise. "Let us dispense with the pretense." The tearing of the thin linen was obscenely loud in the quiet room. Alianor cried out, a small, choked sound, as the cold air hit her skin. Roland's eyes gleamed in the firelight, not with lust, but with the satisfaction of dominance, of breaking. He pushed her backwards towards the massive bed. She stumbled, falling onto the cold sheets. He loomed over her, a dark silhouette against the firelight, the scent of cloves and wine and raw power, overwhelming. Without hesitation, without reserve, His words from the night before echoed in her mind, intertwined with Bess's terrified face. Or your maid's usefulness will come to a very final end. Alianor turned her face into the pillow, biting down hard on the fabric to stifle a scream. She became a statue of ice, her mind fleeing the room, fleeing the crushing weight of him, the violation of his touch, searching, claiming, devoid of tenderness or warmth. She retreated deep inside herself, to the cold tower room, to the memory of the forest air, to the fleeting sensation of safety beside a different fire, with eyes that held kindness, not conquest. She focused on the rough texture of the pillowcase against her cheek, the distant sound of an owl hooting somewhere in the night, the erratic crackle of the dying fire, anything but the present horror. Time stretched, warped. It felt like hours. Roland's breathing was harsh, rhythmic, a metronome marking her degradation. There was no shared pleasure, only the grunting exertion of ownership, the sharp pain, the suffocating humiliation. When it was finally over, he rolled away from her without a word, leaving her exposed, shivering, and utterly shattered on the cold sheets. He rose, pulled on his robe, and left the chamber, the door closing softly behind him, leaving her alone in the suffocating darkness with the smell of him and the ashes of herself. Dawnlight, gray and unwelcome, seeped through the narrow window slits. Alianor hadn't slept. She lay exactly where Roland had left her, curled on her side, the torn chemise offering meager cover. The fire had burned down to embers, offering no warmth. Every bone ached with a deep, cold exhaustion that went beyond the physical. The hollow feeling inside her had expanded, becoming a vast, echoing cavern. She felt scraped raw, violated not just in body, but in spirit. The vibrant, observant woman who had once found solace in forbidden poetry, who had felt a spark of defiance in the forest, felt extinguished. She was Lady de Mowbray now, a possession, a shell. A soft knock, hesitant, shattered the dreadful silence. "Milady?" Bess's voice, thin with fear, came through the door. Alianor couldn't answer. Her voice felt rusted shut. The door creaked open slowly. Bess slipped in, her eyes wide and darting, taking in the scene. The discarded green samite pooled on the floor like a slain creature, the torn chemise, Alianor's rigid form on the bed, the chilling emptiness of the room. A small choked sob escaped the maid. She hurried to the bedside, her own hands trembling violently. "Milady, oh, milady," Bess whispered, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. She didn't touch her yet, hovering, radiating helpless anguish. I brought water, and a clean shift." She gestured feebly towards a ewer and basin she'd set down near the cold hearth, and a simple linen shift folded beside it. Slowly, mechanically, Alianor pushed herself upright. The movement sent fresh waves of soreness through her. She avoided Bess's gaze, staring blankly at the tapestry on the opposite wall. A hunting scene. Hounds tearing at a stag. She felt like the stag. Bess, understanding the need for silence, the absolute necessity of it, helped her without words. She gently eased the torn chemise off, her touch feather-light, her breath catching at the bruises already blooming on Alianor's shoulders, arms, hips. She dipped a cloth in the cold water, wringing it out with shaking hands. The touch of the damp cloth on Alianor's skin made her flinch, but she endured it, closing her eyes. Bess cleaned her with infinite care, as if tending a shattered porcelain doll, wiping away the physical traces of the night, though nothing could touch the stain within. She helped Alianor into the clean shift, its simple, coarse linen a small mercy against her abused skin. Only when Alianor was dressed, sitting numbly on the edge of the bed, did Bess kneel before her, taking one ice-cold hand in both of hers. "Milady," she breathed, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. So sorry." Her tears fell onto Alianor's hand. Alianor looked down at Bess's bowed head, at the vulnerable curve of her neck. The terror in the maid's eyes was a mirror reflecting her own. Roland's threat pulsed between them, unspoken but louder than any bell. Her own survival was meaningless. It was Bess's life that was the chain around her neck. She squeezed Bess's hand, a weak, answering pressure. It was the only communication she could manage. The days blurred into a gray procession of suffocating routine. Alianor moved through Hawksmere Keep like a ghost in her own home. Roland's presence was pervasive. His men patrolled constantly. His stewards managed the dwindling Hawksmere accounts with rapacious efficiency, diverting funds towards improvements that served de Mowbray's interests, reinforcing the outer walls against phantom threats, purchasing more Mowbray livery for the guards, stocking the cellars with his wine. The lead mine production reports were brought directly to Roland in what had been Sir Godfrey's study, now stripped of its personal effects and smelling of Roland's cloves. Roland treated her with a chilling, formal correctness in public. He would offer her his arm, inquire blandly about her comfort, address her as my lady wife, with impeccable, empty courtesy. But in private, behind closed doors, the mask slipped. His demands were peremptory. His touch, when he chose to bestow, it was possessive and devoid of affection, a constant reminder of his ownership. He expected her presence at meals, silent and compliant. He expected her to oversee the household tasks his steward dictated, a hollow echo of her former role. He expected her body in his bed at night, where the violation was repeated with cold efficiency. Alianor performed her duties, her body obeying, while her spirit cowered in that internal tower, replaying Bess's terrified whisper, etching the bruises onto her soul. One afternoon, Sister Marjorie arrived, ostensibly to discuss parish matters with the new Lady de Mowbray. They sat in the solar, weak winter sun, struggling through the leaded windows. Marjorie sipped watered wine, her sharp eyes missing nothing, the shadows beneath Alianor's eyes that no amount of composure could hide, the stiffness in her movements, the way she flinched slightly when a door slammed elsewhere in the keep. The village is settling, praise God, Marjorie began, her tone pious, but her gaze probing. Sir Roland's firm hand was needed, it seems. The unrest after the unfortunate incident with the outlaw has subsided. She paused, watching Alianor's face for a reaction. Alianor kept her expression smooth, her hands folded tightly in her lap, nails digging into her palms. They speak well of your humility, my lady, Marjorie continued, a hint of acid beneath the honey. Your acceptance of God's path and Sir Roland's guidance has been noted, a lesson in obedience for all. Alianor forced herself to meet the nun's eyes. Peace is welcome, sister, she managed, her voice flat. Indeed, Marjorie set her cup down. Though one hears whispers still, idle tongues, about the charcoal burner's fate. She leaned forward slightly. Some say he fled. Others, less charitable, suggest Sir Roland's justice was swift. Did your husband speak of it? For the sake of parish records, you understand. To lay rumors to rest. Alianor's blood ran cold. This was a test, a trap. Marjorie was fishing, either for Roland or for her own malicious purposes. My husband, Alianor said carefully, keeping her voice devoid of inflection, deals with threats to Hawksmere's peace as he sees fit. He does not trouble me with such unpleasant details. She picked up her own untouched cup, needing the barrier. The past is buried, sister. As we agreed. Marjorie's smile was thin. Of course, my lady. As it should be. Though, she added, her voice dropping conspiratorially, it is well known Sir Roland is a most thorough man. One doubts an outlaw could long evade his reach. She let the implication hang, confirmation of Aemon's death, delivered with pious satisfaction. She rose. I shall reassure the curious that all is settled. God's peace be upon this house. Her departure left behind the lingering scent of piety and poison. Later that week, Roland summoned her. You will accompany me to the lead works, he announced, not looking up from a ledger spread on the heavy oak table in the study. It is time you understood the source of Hawksmere's future prosperity. Your prosperity. The journey to the mine entrance, high on the windswept moorland, was made in near silence in a covered cart. The landscape was bleak, skeletal trees clawing at a leaden sky. The air grew colder, sharper, smelling of damp earth and something metallic. The mine entrance was a dark, gaping maw in the hillside, flanked by rough timber structures and piles of slag. Rough-looking men, faces smudged with grime, paused in their labor, eyeing the lord and his lady with wary curiosity and dull resentment. Roland ignored them, striding towards the entrance, his steward scurrying behind. "Observe, wife," Roland commanded, gesturing towards the dark hole. "Wealth, power, drawn from the very bones of your land." His voice held a fervent greed. "My men are expanding the galleries, doubling the output. De Mowbray will be unassailable." He turned to the mine captain, a grizzled man with a permanent stoop. "Report." The captain spoke of progress, of new seams tapped, of increased quotas met. Roland nodded, satisfied. He pointed towards a cluster of dilapidated cottages clinging to the hillside below. "Those hovels will be cleared. New barracks for the miners will be built here, closer to the works. Efficiency." He spoke of men like cattle, of homes as inconvenient obstacles. Alianor stood silently, the cold wind whipping strands of hair loose from her hood. She looked at the miners' gaunt faces, the stoop of their backs, the hopelessness in their eyes. She looked at the dark maw of the mine, imagining the claustrophobic darkness, the back-breaking labor, the constant danger within. This was Roland's vision of prosperity, wealth extracted through human suffering, the land itself ripped open. Hawksmere wasn't being saved. It was being consumed. She felt a flicker, not of defiance, but of profound, icy despair. This was the future he had bought with her body and Aemon's blood. Father Clement walked the edge of Thorn's Hollow, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He hadn't slept properly since Bess's desperate, whispered visit in the dead of night. The girl's terror, her fragmented message about Roland, Sister Marjorie, the stolen herbs, the wolf, the blood on the cobbles. It haunted him. He'd returned from old Millercade's deathbed to find Nan terrified, clutching the message, confirming the worst. Roland's shadow stretched further every day. He was drawn here, to the place of sanctuary he'd offered Aemon Thorne. The cottage looked even more forlorn in winter, snow dusting its roof. He pushed the door open, the familiar scent of wood smoke and dried herbs absent, replaced by cold emptiness and dust. Roland's men had clearly been here. Things were overturned, shelves ransacked. The herbs Bess mentioned were long gone. Clement moved towards the hearth, the cold ashes undisturbed. He knelt, his knees protesting on the hard earth floor. He wasn't sure what he sought. Absolution? A sign? Proof that he hadn't utterly failed the innocent man he'd tried to shelter. His hand brushed against a loose stone near the base of the hearth. It shifted slightly. Frowning, Clement worked his fingers around it, prizing it loose. Behind it, in a small cavity, lay a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. His heart hammered against his ribs. He carefully unwrapped it. Inside lay a small, worn leather pouch. Opening it, he tipped the contents into his palm. Not herbs. A heavy gold signet ring, crusted with dried earth, bearing a crest he recognized instantly, the snarling boar of de Mowbray. And beneath it, a small, intricately carved piece of oak. It depicted a wolf, mid-leap, its lines fluid and powerful. Clement turned it over. On the back, deeply scored, was a single rune-like symbol, one he'd seen Aemon use to mark safe trails in the forest. Beside it, scratched faintly, were two letters. A T, Alianor Thorne? The thought was absurd, yet the carving felt like a message. A plea? A declaration? Proof of a connection Roland would kill to erase. Clement stared at the ring, the symbol of Roland's house, found hidden in Aemon's hearth, found with earth on it. The crime Aemon was accused of. Theft? His mind raced, connecting fragments. Bess's words, Roland's threats, the theft. Could this be it? The stolen item that condemned Aemon years ago? Planted? Found too late? And the carving? A message from Aemon? But where was he? Blood on the cobbles. A cold dread, deeper than the winter air, settled over Father Clement. He held in his hands not just potential evidence of Roland's past crime, but a fragile, dangerous link to the present tragedy. Proof that could shatter Roland's carefully constructed image, but also a beacon that could draw his lethal attention. He rewrapped the bundle with trembling hands, tucking it deep inside his robes, next to his heart. The weight of it felt immense. He had prayed for a sign. Now he had one, and it terrified him. The path ahead was dark, and every step risked not just his own life, but Bess's, and the broken woman, trapped in Hawksmere Keep. He emerged from the cottage, the desolate beauty of the hollow, feeling like a tomb. The ashes of truth were scattered, but perhaps, just perhaps, a single ember still glowed. He had to find a way to shield it, to use it, before Roland's shadow snuffed it out completely.
They say the dawn is merciful, that it reveals truth, that it banishes the phantoms of the night. But there are dawns that offer no mercy. The light that crept through the slitted windows of Hawksmere that morning did not cleanse. It exposed. It found Alianor where Roland had left her, hollowed, broken, silent. The world would call her Lady de Mowbray now, but names a poor armor against despair. And yet, the story does not end with the taking of her body, nor with the silencing of her voice. For though he conquered her flesh, Roland never understood the peril of what he left alive. The smallest spark, when pressed beneath the weight of cruelty, learns patience. It learns to wait for the wind. I have walked the ruins of Hawksmere. I have seen the marks of his ambition carved into the very stones, and the stains that no season could wash away. But I have also seen, in the faded embroidery of a lady's sleeve preserved by time, the glimmer of resistance, a thread of silver running through decay. That too was Alianor, the woman who learned to survive not by defiance, but by endurance, who learned that silence can wound more deeply than a scream. In every tale of tyranny there is a moment, small, almost imperceptible, when the balance shifts, when the hunted begins to remember she was once free. That moment is coming for Alianor. I feel it in the way the moor wind sighs through the heather, in the way the crows rise from the tower at dusk. The ashes of that night still smolder, and from them something terrible and beautiful will be reborn. Mark me well, dear reader. There are no true endings, only transformations. Alianor's sorrow is not the end of her story. It is the tempering of her steel. The ashes of mourning shall yet burn to light the darkest hour.